So I'm going to talk a little bit about the fall of Atlantis. I'm not coming from the perspective of having, seen visions of Atlantis in some kind of a psychic vision or whatever. Not that I think that that's impossible. I actually think it is quite possible, but personally I don't have much in the way of psychic powers. So I have never confirmed Atlantis with my own eyes. But I'm going to be talking about some compelling evidence for the possible existence of Atlantis. Now, the only reason that we're talking about Atlantis at all is because of the writings of Plato. He's the Greek philosopher who lived roughly 500 BC, and in his writings, and he talked about the continent of Atlantis sinking into the sea roughly 9,000 years before him. So that would put it at about 9,500 BC, or 11,500 years ago. Now, there's a fascinating book by Barbara Hand-Clough titled Catastrophobia. I'll go ahead and put a link down below for that. And she talks about the fall of Atlantis and the incredible psychic effects that it had on humanity, and says that many of the problems around the world now are because of the trauma and the disturbances that occurred during that time, and which have just filtered down through the generations, and we're still dealing with the effects of that monumental event. Now, her book is based around another book titled Cataclysm, Compelling Evidence of a Cosmic Catastrophe in 9500 BC. And that book, Cataclysm, is written by two geologists who did a great deal of compiling of evidence over the past, more than 100 years, all of which seems to point towards the concept of this global catastrophe having occurred. And the interesting thing is that the average radiocarbon dating puts it at almost exactly 9500 BC, or almost the same time period that Plato referred to. Their book is extremely wide-ranging. The evidence is absolutely monumental. It's a really fascinating read that explores it from many different angles. It talks about the myth through many different cultures, that all of which refer to this incredible catastrophe occurring. But the vast majority of the book is actual, very real hard evidence that all seems to point towards this event. Things like, if you've heard about the mammoths that were found flash frozen with tropical plants undigested in their stomachs, mammoths that were frozen so suddenly that their meat can still be eaten, then they address that and talk about how basically there was a tilting of the Earth's axis all of a sudden. Mammoths were actually living in tropical environments, and all of a sudden there was a tilting of the Earth's axis. Suddenly they were in the poles, and they were frozen as a result of that, as well as other events that happened at the time. So they basically detail a worldwide catastrophe or cataclysm, not just one island sinking into the ocean in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean or something, but something that affected the entire globe. And they explore the evidence from all kinds of different scientific disciplines. It's just chapter after chapter of very compelling hard evidence, talking about the huge numbers of animals, mammoths, saber-toothed tigers, all the animals that went extinct at that time, that are buried into cliffs. Buried into cracks down in caves and things. And the only conceivable cause that would have created that scenario would be tremendous amounts of water having swept up plants and animals and everything, and then just carried them into these cracks where the water was going. They discuss all kinds of things, from plants that are on the either sides of oceans that shouldn't exist there because there's no way that they could have traveled such a distance, and animals also that exist on the western side of Europe and the eastern side of the United States, when it's something that there's no conceivable way that it could have traveled across vast oceans. So there's a lot more evidence there than I can possibly try to tackle here. Now, the interesting thing is that there's been some very recent evidence that seems to confirm this taking place as well. There was an article just in the past couple of weeks that talks about a meteorite storm that hit the Earth roughly 12,000 years ago, they say. and they found rock samples on multiple continents, all dating back to the same time period, that basically rock that was liquefied and then re-solidified. And the only conceivable way that this rock could have gotten so hot as to have liquefied and then solidified again would be some sort of a cosmic event, such as meteorites hitting the Earth. I'll go ahead and put a link down below to that article as well. It's quite fascinating that it gets in almost the exact same time frame, 12,000 years ago. Of course, radiocarbon dating isn't absolutely exact, and when you're talking about averages, then their average of 9500 BC could certainly be off by a few hundred years. But there's more evidence emerging with this recent article getting a little bit more mainstream that this global catastrophe may in fact have occurred. Now there's a whole nother thing to explore on this subject, which is that of ancient ruins that are submerged under the ocean, such as Yonoguni outside of Japan. You've heard rumblings of a pyramid or some other kind of ruins that are underneath the ocean around Cuba. All over the world, then there are actually ruins that are submerged, and many of which are too deep to be explained by simply rising sea levels. If they had been above the ocean and then somehow got that deep, it would have to be a result of land masses changing. Robert Hancock is an incredibly comprehensive researcher who has been exploring all of this stuff, and so I'll recommend his books as well. Fingerprints of the Gods is his first book, and then he's got a whole series of a lot of different books, one of which is focused purely on these underwater ruins. And so there's a great deal of evidence out there that indeed there was some kind of a massive catastrophe that occurred in that time frame of roughly 12,000 years ago. There's evidence that there may have been other human civilizations that were destroyed at that time. Humanity itself may have been virtually wiped out, and then managed to sort of claw back to prominence. But feel free to do your own research and see if perhaps the fall of Atlantis is not just a myth, but may be something that actually occurred.